Deploying and configuring DHCP service. What is DHCP? DHCP is Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. Okay, and from the name you can figure out that it is used for automatically or configuring the IP address of the workstations or the computers or the network devices. So these are the agenda for today's lecture. Okay, it automatically configures the IP address and other TCP IP settings. We will show you what is other TCP IP settings, okay, later on. So why it is used? Because it saves the time. You don't have to go to each computer and record, okay, and put the IP address and put setup. Yeah. Also, it prevents configuration errors so that you don't duplicate or create an error. So it's more efficient, okay? Saves time. The DHCP consists of 3 components. Server application, DHCP server, the part of the DHCP that's installed on the server. Client, the one that's installed on the workstation. And then we have the protocol itself, the communication protocol. Okay, so there are 3 different IP address allocation methods. When we allocate IP address, DHCP also give us different options. Either it's dynamic, yani when you open the computer, it will get an IP address randomly from the scope. Okay. Automatic allocation, the DHCP server permanently assign an IP address to a client from a scope. Okay, permanent. Manual allocation, the DHCP server permanently assign a specific IP address to a specific computer on the network. It's called a reservation, manual or reservation. Okay. You use manually allocated addresses for computers that must have the same IP address all times. Yani like your mail server, maybe your IIS server, web server, printing server, because you want the IP address to be there. Okay. Now there are some extensions. When you configure the DHCP, it will ask you for some extra configuration. So you are not only configuring the IP address, it gives you some added or value, some bonus configuration or extra configuration. You configure the subnet mask for your scope. You specify the router, the gateway, we call it gateway. And then the DNS, domain name server, you can configure also the host name, okay, specifies host name, this specifies the DNS home name the client will use. And domain name specifies the name of the DNS domain on which system will reside. We will do this in the lab so it will be more clear for you, inshallah. So this option provides parameters that govern the DHCP lease negotiation and renewal process. Okay, and when you turn on the computer, how does it take or get the IP address? We call this process IP lease. So there is a negotiation. The client machine will request the IP address. We call this requested IP address. Then IP address lease time. Yani by default it is 8 days, but you can change it. Also server identifier. All right. These things will be more clear when we do the lab. You will find that it is really easy to configure. You have also parameter request list, message, if there is an error message from the server to the client. in DHCP negative acknowledge. There is the renewal T1 time. T1 time, I will explain it now. Another slide will come for T1 time, but I will explain it now. T1 time, you lease the IP address from the DHCP. Okay, I am a client, I lease the IP address. DHCP server gave me IP address for 8 days. At the end of day 4, this is 50% of the time. This is called T1, which is renewal time. So this is called renew time. Okay, here when you reach 50%, the client will send a message, unicast message, specifically to that DHCP server. I reached 50%. Yalla, you want to renew for me, or are you ready to renew? If everything okay, خلاص, it's renewed. If no response, the client will wait until it reaches T2 time. T2, low around 80 plus 85, 87. When it reaches that time, خلاص, this is critical. It will send now broadcast to all the DHCP servers. Anyone can give me an IP address? خلاص, so this is T1 and T2. We call T2 rebinding. This is the renewal process, what I have just explained to you. They are explaining it here again, 50%. T2 is 87.5. You see it here? This is 87.5. Okay. Then we have a diagram. These are some message types when they are negotiating. DHCP discover, the client will send this message. DHCP offer, the server will send this message. DHCP request, the client accept to renew an IP address. DHCP acknowledge, used by the server to acknowledge a client's acceptance of an offered IP address. So there are also more messages, but this is the sort of messages exchanged between the client and the server. Many messages are exchanged. We have also decline. If the client declined an offered IP address, okay, DHCP negative acknowledgement for the server to reject a request, acceptance. Then we have DHCP release by the client, and we have DHCP informed by the client to obtain additional TCP/IP configuration parameters. This is the leasing, what we have just mentioned in the previous 2 slides. Here, we try to maximize it. You can see here, they have the start here. The client will send a broadcast, DHCP discover, to find out whose DHCP server is available in the network. Okay, so the DHCP server receives the broadcast. If the server has IP address available, yes, it will send a DHCP offer. If it does not have, okay, if it has, it will send offer, and khalas, it is accepted by the client. If it is accepted, let me just move here. Okay, if it does not have, message discarded and transaction fails. And the server, khalas, I don't have it, don't respond. Okay, then so the client broadcast DHCP request. The DHCP server will transmit DHCP acknowledge. Then it will send to the client. The address passes client ARP test. Okay, and then the client transmits DHCP. If it does not pass, or the client doesn't recognize this address, it will send a decline. If yes, everything is good, client is bound transaction succeeds يعني finish خلاص got the IP address. Okay. So here in this case, if the transaction declined, address is declined, send a message to the server, transaction fails. Okay. So this is the process. We have another diagram for T1 and T2 اللي هو renewal. Remember, we have renewal and we have rebinding. Renewal is at 50%. Rebinding is at 87.7.
Renewal T1,
yeah, T1 and T2. طيب, now in the network, we can have more than one DHCP server. Okay. The DHCP server, by theory, it can support many thousands of clients. But practically, okay, it's not practical, because first of all, you have routers in the middle and also the broadcast, the bandwidth. And virtually all enterprise networks require more than one DHCP server. DHCP relies on broadcast message, which have limitation. You know, broadcast cannot go by past the router. Router will block broadcast. So how do we overcome this problem? There are different ways for the DHCP infrastructure, how we place DHCP in the network. We can have DHCP or distributed DHCP infrastructure. Distributed, okay, means that you have a DHCP in each network segment. Okay. All right, we call this distributed. Okay, what are the advantages of this? Each network, they have their own DHCP, they have quick access. Good. You do not have to worry about traffic, because the traffic is only in that segment of the network. But what are the disadvantages? Cost. And also extra effort by the administrator. You need to go to configure how many DHCP servers. Okay. So these are disadvantages. And if one DHCP is faulty, then they don't have they don't have IP address. Then they have to have another DHCP, okay, for fault tolerance. The other way, this is the distributed. You see here, distributed. You have DHCP server. You have DHCP server. You have DHCP server in each network. The second one is centralized. I have one DHCP server and it's connected to all the network. Okay. And in each sub-network, instead of me configuring a dedicated DHCP server, all I need to do is to install a relay agent. Relay agent. That will do the job of DHCP server. Okay. So what are the advantages? Reduced administrative burden. It's easier for the administrator. Just configure the DHCP. Okay. But what are the disadvantages? The traffic. Traffic will be huge because you have only one DHCP. Everyone should communicate with that DHCP server. Okay. Another method is hybrid. Hybrid is a mixture of centralized and distributed. Okay. So this is the centralized. You see here I have the relay agent. Relay agent. Now there are some advices there are some advices or some recommendation or best practices for placing your DHCP or config where you put your DHCP to optimize the traffic. First one is place DHCP server close to the client. Adjust or increase the release time duration. Don't make it very short if you don't have to do that. Don't make it 1 hour, then every 1 hour, all stations have to release, renew. Make the lease duration unlimited, if possible, Deploying the DHCP server, this is what we'll be doing in lab 2, inshallah. Okay, DHCP service is packaged as a role in Windows Server 2019. So we need to install the role, okay? DHCP servers operate independently, so you must install the service and configure scopes on every computer that will function as a DHCP server. The first step is we create a scope. Then, this is how we create the scope. We'll do this in the lab, but this is a screenshot, just to have an idea. Okay, you give it a name and description, and then you put the range of the scope, the start IP address and the end IP address. Okay, you put them here. And then here you have your subnet mask, length, this, yeah, we must use the length. Yeah, we must give a subnet mask, and you should give it a name. Here you can put your exclusion. Let's say I want to exclude the first 5 IP addresses, so I put the IP addresses here. Okay. Now, here is very important, the lease duration. By default, as you can see, it's 8 days, so you can leave it for the sake of the lab. Okay. Now it will ask you, do you want to configure the extra configurations? Remember we said the router, the DNS, things like that. So we will say yes. In the lab, we are going to configure these. Okay, so this is your router or default gateway. You will put it here. Okay, and then here you will enter the domain name and DNS server. Okay, you need to enter it here. Okay, see the IP address here. This is the server IP address. Now it will ask you at the end, do you want to activate the scope? Please make sure you activate it. Scope options. We have 2 kinds of options. We have scope options and server options. Scope options supplied only to the clients. Server options, they are supplied to all DHCP clients receiving address from the server. Okay? So scope options, they are related to the scope. Server options to all the computers connected. Yeah, because maybe you have more than one scope. That's the difference. Here we can configure some of the DHCP options. This is the dialog box. Reservation. Reservation is a manually allocated address. As I mentioned, it is used for computers that should have a static IP address, like the domain controller, DNS, Internet Web Server, okay? But someone might say, why do I need to do this through the DHCP? Why don't I do it just manually? because DHCP, you want to automate your work. You want to do everything through the DHCP. So it's better you do it through DHCP. Okay, so this is how we create the reservation. By the way, if you want to create a reservation, you should have the MAC address of the computers you want to reserve IP address for it. Okay, how do we get the MAC address? You can go and do an IP config all, and then you can get the MAC address of that device. Relay agent, it's used when you have a centralized or hybrid DHCP infrastructure. Okay, and you will need a relay agent on each subnet. All right. Many routers are capable of functioning as DHCP relay agents, but when they cannot, you can configure Windows Server 2019 to do that, to be a relay agent. Okay, and some routers they are configured as a relay agent, so you don't have to have a dedicated machine to do this task. Okay, now please go over the summary and let me know if you have any question.